At 2:14 in the afternoon, 15 of Meridian Technology's highest-paid engineers stood frozen in front of a wall of red screens, and not one of them knew where to begin. The system wasn't just failing, it was collapsing exactly the way someone had warned it would, in a report no one read under a name no one remembered. CEO Clare Navarro pulled up the source code herself, scrolled back 7 years, and buried inside the original authentication module in a field most people never bothered to check, she found 3 letters: EJC. She cross-referenced the patent database. The name that came back stopped her cold. Then she opened the personnel file and recognized the face immediately. The quiet man with a small cardboard box, the one who had walked out of this building 5 days ago, without a single person lifting their head to say goodbye. Who was he, and what did this company do to him? Ethan Cole arrived at Meridian Technologies every morning at 7:45, early enough that the elevators were still empty, late enough that the overnight security guard had already switched shifts. He liked that window. Quiet floors. Cold coffee from the break room pot no one had touched yet. 15 minutes before anyone needed anything from him. He had worked on the 14th floor for 8 years, long enough to watch the company outgrow 2 office spaces and absorb 3 smaller firms. Long enough to remember when the authentication system he'd designed ran on 4 servers in a rented closet downtown. Now, it processed over 400,000 financial transactions a day and sat beneath every product Meridian had ever built. Invisible load-bearing never mentioned by name in any press release or executive presentation. Neither was his. Ethan wasn't the kind of person who complained about that. He came in, he did the work he left at 3:15 every afternoon, without exception, because Lily's school let out at 3, and the walk from the pickup line to the parking lot took exactly 12 minutes if he hit the lights right. He had timed it on the first day of kindergarten and had not been late once since. Lily was 6. She didn't talk much, not in the way other kids did, spilling words constantly filling every silence. She preferred to draw. Portraits mostly. Strangers she'd seen at the grocery store or on the bus, rendered from memory in her sketchbook, with a seriousness that didn't belong on a 6-year-old's face. She would present them to Ethan at dinner like they were important documents requiring his signature. He always received them that way. Her mother had been the same, quiet, until she had something worth saying. Then precise. Sarah had died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. Ethan did not talk about that at work. He did not talk about much at work at all. What he did, what he had always done, was watch the systems. 6 weeks before the termination notice appeared on his desk, Ethan noticed something wrong. It showed up in the log files. First, irregular latency in the secondary authentication nodes, handshake timeouts, cycling at intervals. Too consistent to be random, too infrequent to trigger any automated alert. The kind of pattern that only made sense if you understood how the original architecture had been laid out, which routing decisions had been made in year 1, which compromises had been documented in the build notes, and which ones had only ever lived in Ethan's head. He wrote it up. All of it, the anomaly pattern, the probable cause, the cascade risk if left unaddressed, and the precise sequence of patches that would fix it before it became something worse. 12 pages, single-spaced, with annotated log excerpts attached. He sent it to Derek Walsh on a Tuesday evening after the office emptied out. Derek Walsh was Meridian's deputy director of engineering. He had a way of speaking in meetings that sounded authoritative, controlled cadence, deliberate word choices, and a way of managing up that had kept him comfortably positioned between the people who built things and the people who funded them for the better part of a decade. He was good at that distance, good at making sure information moved through him before it moved anywhere else. The report sat in his inbox for 2 weeks without a response. Ethan sent it again, flagged urgent. Still nothing. On the 3rd attempt, he added the head of IT infrastructure to the CC line, Within an hour, Derek forwarded the report to the executive leadership team. Ethan's name had been removed from the header. Derek's name sat in its place. Ethan discovered this the next morning through the shared mailbox, a routine check he'd run every day for years. He opened the forwarded email, read it once, then closed the tab and went to get coffee. He stood at the break room window, with his mug looking out at the gray November skyline, and did not make a decision about what to do next. That was the thing people misunderstood about him. They read his stillness as passivity. It wasn't. He was simply very clear about what mattered and very unbothered by what didn't. His name on an email thread did not make the list. The vulnerability in the secondary node, however, still did. He met Clare Navarro for the first time that same morning, in the same break room about 40 minutes later. She was standing in front of the cabinet, where the extra coffee filters were kept, not finding them, and turned when she heard him come in. He didn't know who she was, yet she'd been announced as the incoming CEO 4 days earlier. But Ethan didn't follow internal memos closely, and she wasn't wearing anything that would have marked her as someone worth paying particular attention to. Dark blazer, sensible shoes. The focused expression of someone trying to orient themselves in a building they didn't know yet. "Server room," she said. "I've been told it's on this floor, but I've walked the whole east wing." "West," Ethan said. "Take the far stairwell down, one, then follow the cold air." Claire looked at him for a moment, in a way that wasn't quite curiosity, and wasn't quite assessment, something quieter than either. "Follow the cold air," she repeated. "You'll know when you're close." She nodded and left. At the end of the hallway, she slowed for just a beat and glanced back over his shoulder. Ethan was already pouring his coffee. Neither of them gave the moment a second thought. The next morning, a white envelope was sitting on his keyboard when he arrived at 7:45. The letter was brief. One paragraph HR language that had been refined over decades, specifically to communicate maximum information with minimum accountability. Organizational restructuring. Position eliminated. Last day, effective immediately. 8 years reduced to a single sentence in the passive voice, as if the decision had simply occurred like weather. Ethan read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at his desk. The second monitor he'd requisitioned himself the cable management he'd done with zip ties on a Saturday, because it bothered him the small cactus sitting in the corner in a terracotta pot that Lily had painted with uneven blue stripes the morning he started his 7th year. She'd handed it to him at the door, with both hands like it was fragile. He started with the cactus. It didn't take long to pack. He hadn't accumulated much. A handful of technical manuals he'd bought with his own money, a charger, a coffee mug. He turned it in his hands once, then set it back on the desk and left it there. Some things weren't worth carrying. He put everything else into a small cardboard box, the kind the mailroom kept in stacks by the copy machines, and carried it to the elevator without stopping at anyone's desk. It was a Tuesday. The floor was full. 40, maybe 45 people within eyeline of his path to the exit. No one looked up. He pressed the lobby button. The doors closed. In the elevator, he checked his watch. 10:47. If he drove straight to the market on Ridgeland, he could pick up the ingredients for Lily's favorite dinner, the pasta with the brown butter and sage she'd decided she loved after watching him make it 3 Sundays in a row, and still have it ready before she came home. She had an art class on Tuesdays. She'd be in a good mood. He thought about that, and the elevator reached the lobby, and he walked out into the cold. It was not that Ethan Cole had chosen silence. It was that he had chosen something else instead, years ago when he stood in a hospital parking garage at 6 in the evening with his phone in his hand and heard a doctor use the word aggressive and understood precisely what that meant. Sarah had been beside him, one hand on his arm, already working out logistics in her head, who would take Lily on the treatment days, whether the insurance would cover the specialist, what they would tell her parents. Always practical, always moving forward, even then. The call from Derek had come 20 minutes later. Ethan had still been in the parking garage sitting on the hood of his car because he hadn't been able to make himself drive yet. The offer had been simple. Meridian would purchase full ownership of the authentication system, every patent, every design document, every line of code. The number Derek named was enough to cover Sarah's treatment deposit, the specialist consult, and 3 months of margin if things went longer than expected. The money would be in the account before Friday. All Ethan had to do was sign. He had asked for 24 hours. Derek said he had until Thursday morning. Ethan signed on Wednesday afternoon in a coffee shop, 2 blocks from the oncology center, on a document he did not read carefully enough, not because he was careless, but because Sarah had an appointment at 4, and he needed to be there before she went in. And the only thing he was able to fully think about was making sure she didn't walk into that room alone. He did not regret the decision. He had never regretted it, but he had kept a copy of Derek's follow-up email sent 2 years later, 4 lines of warning dressed up as reassurance, not because he'd planned to use it, but because it lived on the same phone as Sarah's photographs, and he couldn't bring himself to delete anything on that phone. That was all. That was the whole of it. He carried the cardboard box to his car, set it on the passenger seat, and drove north toward the market on Ridgeland. Brown butter, sage, pasta, the kind that Lily said looked like little ears. He had things to do. The collapse began on a Sunday. By 2 in the afternoon, the authentication system had started dropping connections across 3 of Meridian's primary transaction nodes. By 2:14, the cascade had reached the secondary layer, exactly the sequence Ethan had mapped in his report, the one that had been sent upward under Derek's name and never acted upon. Within the hour, the 14th floor looked like a situation room. 15 engineers crowded around terminals, voices low and taut, the overhead lights humming against a wall of red status indicators that no one knew how to turn green. Derek Walsh stood at the front of the room with his arms crossed and his expression calibrated to project calm. He was good at that, at occupying space in a crisis, without contributing anything technically useful to the resolution of it. He spoke in full sentences. He used words like containment and controlled rollback and parallel diagnostic track. The words arranged themselves into something that sounded like a plan without actually being one. Clare Navarro sat at the end of the conference table and listened to all of it. Then she started asking questions. She asked about the handshake failure rate in the secondary nodes specifically. Derek said the team was assessing the full scope. She asked what the last clean commit to the authentication layer had been, and whether anyone had reviewed the build logs from the preceding 6 weeks. Derek said the priority right now was stabilization. She asked him to describe technically what stabilization meant in this context, what the first step was, what tool, what file, what command. Derek's answers grew shorter, then vaguer, then shorter again. Claire did not push. She wrote something in the notebook in front of her, closed it, and said she wanted the complete personnel records for everyone who had worked on the core infrastructure between 2017 and 2022 on her desk by end of day. The list arrived at 4:30. She read through every name. Ethan Cole was not on it. She stayed after everyone left. The floor went quiet the way office floors do late on Sundays, a particular kind of silence that feels borrowed, like the building is tolerating your presence rather than welcoming it. Claire pulled up the source code repository and started at the beginning. 7 years of commit history, thousands of entries. She wasn't looking for anything specific. She was looking for the shape of the thing who had built, what in what order and how the decisions made in the early years had determined every constraint that came after. It took her an hour and a half to find the module she wanted. The original authentication core first committed in February of 2018. In the author field, EJC, she pulled the build documentation next and found a patent citation embedded in the original technical notes, a reference number she hadn't seen in any of Meridian's official filings. She ran it through the USPTO database. Patent number 11,284,317. Adaptive Multi-Layer Authentication Protocol. Filing date, February 2018. Inventor Ethan James Cole. Licensee Meridian Technologies. Zui. She read the name twice, then opened the personnel file she'd been given earlier and searched for it. The photograph loaded, and she recognized him immediately. The quiet man in the break room, the one who had told her to follow the cold air, who had looked at her with no particular interest and no performance of any kind, and then gone back to pouring his coffee. He had walked out of this building 5 days ago with a cardboard box. Claire picked up her phone and called Derek Walsh at 10:58 at night. He answered on the second ring voice, smooth, the kind of smooth that takes practice. Was Ethan Cole the architect of this system? She asked. No preamble. The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. She counted. There were several contributors over the years, Derek said finally. The IP ownership was formalized through a 2018 agreement. Claire ended the call. 4 seconds was not the hesitation of someone searching their memory. It was the hesitation of someone deciding how much of the truth was safe to release. She drove to the address on the old consulting contract the following afternoon. North side, a quiet block, a building with a green awning, and a buzzer panel that took 2 tries to work. Ethan answered the door in a canvas apron with a cast-iron pan in one hand, and from somewhere behind him came the sound of Lily at the kitchen table. The specific, focused quiet of a child who is drawing seriously and does not want to be interrupted. Claire told him what she'd found. The patent, the commit history, the personnel list with his name absent. She did not soften any of it. Ethan listened in the doorway, then set the pan down on the entryway table and told her about February of 2018, the diagnosis, the deposit, the phone call in the parking garage. He spoke without self-pity, the way people describe weather events. This happened then, this then, this. Derek had called within the hour. The offer had been specific, and the timeline had been tight. And the only calculation Ethan had been capable of performing that evening was the one that ended with Sarah beginning treatment before Friday. I didn't read the authorship clause carefully, he said. I knew what I was signing away. I just wasn't thinking about that. He went inside and came back with an old phone, the kind with a cracked corner, and a battery indicator permanently stuck at 11%. He held it out to her without explanation. Claire scrolled to the email he'd already opened, Derek's message from 2024 lines. Best not to bring this up with anyone. It's all been handled. She looked up from the screen. You kept this for 4 years and never used it. I kept the phone for Sarah's pictures, Ethan said. The email was just still there. She handed it back. He plugged it into the charger on the entryway table, the cord duct-taped at the base, where the wire had started to fray, and she noticed the phone case had a small drawing tucked behind the clear cover. A woman with dark hair, rendered in colored pencil on notebook paper. From the kitchen, Lily appeared in the doorway, still holding her pencil, clearly having decided that her drawing could wait. She looked at Claire, the way she looked at everything she was preparing to put on paper, steadily, without self-consciousness taking inventory. Claire met her eyes and smiled. Lily did not smile back, but she did not look away either. Then she retreated to the kitchen, pencil in hand, already somewhere else in her head. Neither Ethan nor Claire said anything about it. The next morning, Claire stepped into the elevator at 8:40 and found Derek Walsh already in the lobby hallway when the doors opened. He was standing in the precise center of the corridor between the elevator bank and the exit, and he began speaking before she had fully cleared the doors, measured collegial framed as professional concern. He said that reaching out to former employees, particularly ones whose departures had involved contractual agreements, created legal exposure for the company. He said it gently. He said the board would likely share this concern. He suggested she consult with legal counsel before taking any further steps, and he said all of this in the tone of someone doing a favor. Clare looked at him. His posture was relaxed. His expression was the practiced neutrality of someone who had learned that the appearance of reasonableness was its own form of leverage. "Thank you for the concern," she said, and walked past him to the elevator. She could feel him watching the doors close. That night, her phone lit up at 2:17 in the morning. The email had no subject line. It came from a personal address she recognized from the old contract files, Systems, and the body of the message was 9 pages long. No greeting, no preamble. Just the work, the exact location of the primary fault. In the secondary node, the cascade sequence currently in progress, the full patch protocol ordered by priority, with time estimates for each step. It was the most complete technical document she had read since joining Meridian. It was also, she understood immediately, the same analysis from the original report updated in real time, incorporating the live failure data from the past 48 hours. At the bottom of the last page, below the final technical entry, a single sentence in the same plain font as everything above it. Not for the board. Just because it needed to be fixed. Clare read that sentence and set her phone face down on the desk. Outside the window, Lake Michigan was dark and flat and enormous, and she sat with that for a long time. She thought about a man who had been fired by this company, whose name had been removed from his own work, who had received nothing for any of it, sitting down after his daughter was asleep and spending several hours writing a document no one had asked for to fix a problem that was no longer his responsibility, and sending it at 2 in the morning to the company that had discarded him. Not as a bargaining chip, not with any demand attached, just because the system was broken and he could not make peace with leaving it that way. Clare had spent 15 years building a career on the principle that good judgment meant knowing which battles were worth fighting. She had made that calculation many times, when to push, when to absorb, when the cost of being right was higher than the benefit. She was good at it. She had told herself it was wisdom. Sitting in the dark with Ethan Cole's 9 pages on her desk, she understood that there was a version of that reasoning that was just cowardice with better vocabulary. She turned her phone back over. Then she opened her laptop and started writing. What she wrote was not a memo. It was not an internal recommendation or a carefully hedged legal assessment. It was a request for an emergency board meeting scheduled for 11 the following morning, with a single agenda item listed accountability and remediation. Ethan James Cole. She attached 4 documents. The patent filing with his name as inventor. The commit history with the EJC author tag visible across 7 years of the repository. The 2018 contract with the authorship clause, highlighted and the date cross-referenced against Sarah's diagnosis, a detail she had found in the insurance records that were part of his terminated employee file records that HR had apparently never thought to read carefully. And Derek's 2020 email forwarded from the screenshot Ethan had shown her 4 lines that said everything about what kind of institution Meridian had been quietly permitting itself to become. She did not attach the 9-page document. That one felt like it belonged to him. At the bottom of the request, she wrote 1 additional line for the board chair, not as part of the formal agenda, just as context. This man sent us a complete technical solution at 2 in the morning after we fired him and asked for nothing. I want the board to understand what that means before we decide what we are. She sent it at 3:41. Then she went to make coffee, stood at the kitchen window, while it brewed, and watched the sky over the lake begin to lighten at the edges. She thought about the break room on the 14th floor, the man who had pointed her toward the server room without looking up from what he was doing, without any interest in being noticed. Follow the cold air, like it was the most natural thing in the world to help someone find what they needed and then go back to your own work. She had been CEO of Meridian Technologies for 10 days. She was only now beginning to understand what she'd walked into. Derek Walsh did not wait to see how the board meeting would go. By 7 in the morning, he had already made 2 phone calls, both to board members he had cultivated over the years, through the ordinary mechanisms of institutional loyalty. Remembered birthdays, forwarded opportunities, the small ongoing accounting of favors that functions as currency in organizations where power is distributed, but never evenly. He framed what he said carefully. Clare Navarro was new, he told them. Talented, certainly, but prone to letting personal reactions override process. The situation with the former employee was sympathetic, but pursuing it without legal counsel was the kind of move that created liability, and a CEO 10 days into her tenure, making unilateral decisions about settled contractual matters, was a pattern the board might want to address early. He was persuasive. He had been persuasive his entire career. But he had misjudged one of the 2 people he called. At 8 o'clock, Meridian's general counsel appeared in Clare's doorway and told her about both conversations in the flat, precise tone of someone who had decided that accuracy mattered more than diplomacy. Clare thanked her. Then she asked her assistant to confirm the 11 o'clock meeting and requested that all 7 board members be present in person. Before she walked into the boardroom, she stood in the hallway outside and took out her phone. She opened Ethan's email and read the last line once more, not for courage exactly, but for orientation. A reminder of what the meeting was actually about, underneath all the procedural framing that was about to be placed around it. Not for the board, just because it needed to be fixed. She put the phone away and opened the door. There were 7 people seated around the table. Clare stood at the head of it and did not sit down. She began with the patent. She put it on the screen, the full USPTO, record the filing date of February 2018, the inventor field, with Ethan James Cole's name printed in the unambiguous clarity of a federal document. She let them read it. Then she pulled up the commit history, 7 years of repository logs, the EJC, author tag, appearing on every foundational entry in the authentication module, consistent and unbroken from the first line of code to the last modification Ethan had made before his access was revoked. She showed them the 2018 contract. She highlighted the authorship clause and displayed it beside the insurance record she had found in his terminated employee file, a document that showed the date of Sarah's oncology intake appointment 2 days before the contract was signed. She did not narrate the connection. She let the date speak. Then she put Derek's email on the screen. All 4 lines enlarged, centered, visible from every seat in the room. Best not to bring this up with anyone. It's all been handled. She told them about the 4 reports Ethan had filed before his termination. The first, the second, the third, each ignored. The third stripped of his name and forwarded under someone else's. She described the system failure currently in its 4th day, cascading exactly as his documentation had predicted. And then she told them about the email that had arrived at 2:17 in the morning. She described the 9 pages, the fault location, the cascade sequence, the complete patch protocol with time estimates. She described what it meant to produce that document under those circumstances. Fired unnamed, uncompensated, under no obligation of any kind. She did not editorialize. She simply described it, and then she read the last line aloud to the room. The boardroom was quiet in a way that felt different from ordinary quiet. Clare set down the sheet of paper she'd been holding. "The contract is legally sound," she said. "I'm not disputing that. What I'm asking is whether we are a company that can distinguish between what is legal and what is right. This man sent us a complete solution at 2 in the morning after we terminated him. No one requested it. There would be no compensation. I want to know if this board is willing to acknowledge what that means." 6 of the 7 voted in favor. 2 of the members Derek had called voted to abstain. They could not bring themselves to vote against the motion after hearing that last line read aloud by someone who clearly understood its weight. Derek Walsh was suspended before noon. A formal internal investigation was opened within 48 hours. Claire drove to Lily's school that afternoon and arrived 10 minutes before the final bell. She parked across the street and waited. The November air was the kind of cold that arrived with intention, not the gradual cooling of autumn, but a genuine drop, the temperature that meant Chicago had stopped pretending. She sat in the car for a moment, then got out anyway. Ethan was already at the gate when she crossed the street. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too light for the weather, a paper grocery bag tucked under one arm, his breath visible in small, even clouds. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and watched her approach with an expression that did not change much, not surprised, not guarded. Just present. Claire stopped a few feet away. "The board wants to meet with you," she said. Ethan looked at her steadily. "For what?" "To make it right." He didn't answer immediately. He shifted the grocery bag to his other arm and looked toward the school doors, which had not opened yet. Then he looked back at her, and she had the sense he was measuring something, not her, specifically, but the offer itself, turning it in his hands the way you turn something to check for structural weakness. The school doors opened. Lily came through them at full speed, backpack swinging a pencil case clutched to her chest. With both arms, her coat half unzipped despite the cold. She covered the distance to Ethan in a few long strides and drove straight into him, and he caught her with the arm that wasn't holding the grocery bag and held on. Then Lily lifted her head and saw Claire. Her expression shifted into something specific and certain, the look of a child who has been drawing a face from memory and is now seeing that face standing 3 feet away in the cold November air. She studied Claire the same way she had studied her through the kitchen doorway 2 days earlier, steadily without apology, completing an inventory she had already begun. "You're the lady in my picture," Lily said. Claire looked at Ethan. He was watching his daughter with the particular quality of attention he seemed to reserve for things he had no adequate response to. "She draws people," he said simply. "Keeps drawing them until she figures out who they are." Claire looked back at Lily. "Can I see it sometime?" Lily considered this with the gravity the question deserved. "It's on the fridge," she said, as though that settled the question of access entirely. Ethan walked into the Meridian boardroom 3 days later, carrying a laptop he'd owned for 6 years. The lid had a scuffed corner where it had been dropped on a concrete floor in the server room during a 3-day deployment push in the early years, and in the center of it, slightly off-center, was a small blue star sticker, the adhesive kind that came in sheets, the kind primary schools used on good work. Lily had pressed it onto the lid one morning while he was making breakfast, and by the time he noticed, she had moved on to something else entirely, and the moment for objecting had passed. He'd left it there. He sat down and opened the laptop without preamble. 7 board members watched him from the other side of the table. He spoke for 12 minutes. He did not perform anything. He did not describe what had been done to him or argue for a particular interpretation of events. He simply explained the system, how it had been designed, why certain architectural decisions had been made in the first 2 years, what constraints those decisions had created, and how the current failure was the direct result of warnings that had not been acted upon. He spoke the way someone speaks when they understand something completely and are trying to efficiently transfer that understanding to people who need it. He used no jargon that he didn't immediately clarify. He referenced specific files and timestamps without looking at notes. Not one of the 7 people across the table interrupted him. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. The board chair, a man in his late 60s, who had been with Meridian since its 2nd year, leaned forward with his hands flat on the table. "We owe you an apology, Mr. Cole," he said. Ethan looked at him. Then he nodded once, a single complete acknowledgement, the kind that receives something without minimizing it and without inflating it. He did not say it was fine. He did not say he understood. Some things were not fine, and saying so was not bitterness, it was just accuracy. Claire caught up with him in the hallway. She held out an envelope. He took it, opened it, and read it, the full document, every line at his own pace, and without anyone waiting in a parking garage with a deadline. A long-term consulting contract. His name in the author field of all relevant technical documentation. The patent number cited correctly the inventor record, to be updated with the USPTO within 30 days. The compensation rate was twice his previous salary. Ethan read it twice. Then he looked up. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Claire said. "That's why I did." He folded the envelope carefully along its original crease and put it in his jacket pocket. The system was fully restored in exactly 14 days, not a day longer than Ethan's 217 document had projected. The patch sequence ran in the order he had specified, at the pace he had estimated, without significant deviation. It was, in the end, an entirely unremarkable recovery. The kind that happens when the right person writes the right instructions. 412 people logged into Meridian's platform on the first morning the system ran clean again. None of them knew anything had been wrong. None of them knew anything had been fixed. The authentication layer processed their requests in the background, silent and uninterrupted, the way infrastructure works when it has been built by someone who understood what they were building and why it mattered. Ethan James Cole's name appeared on Meridian's official technical documentation for the first time. The USPTO record was updated. The authorship field empty for 8 years was corrected. In December, Claire drove to the small office Ethan had rented near the lakefront. She brought coffee black, no sugar, committed to memory from a single observation in a break room on the 14th floor. The same break room where he had left a coffee mug behind on the morning everything ended, and where, without knowing it, she had been standing 20 minutes before. The office was modest. 1 desk, 2 monitors, a whiteboard covered in architectural diagrams, a window that faced east toward the water. They talked for a while about the system, and then about other things, and at some point the conversation moved. In the way conversations do, when neither person is performing for the other, slower, easier, requiring less management. When she left, she drove back through the north side without planning a route, at home on the refrigerator between Lily's school schedule and a photograph of Sarah standing in summer light, squinting slightly, laughing at something just outside the frame. The drawing was still there. A woman in a teal blazer looking straight ahead, rendered in colored pencil on a page torn carefully from a sketchbook. Below the figure, in large, uneven letters that listed slightly to the right, written in red pencil, by a child who was still learning that lines don't have to be perfect to say exactly what you mean. Miss Clare, the lady Dad looks at. Every morning before he made coffee, Ethan looked at that drawing, and every morning he found a reason to stop by the lakefront office